Okay, so I want to talk about anger. It's what I do. Anger is what brings my clients to me, and it brings them on a journey. Anger and anger management mean different things to different people. I wonder what it means to you. When we talk about anger, it can mean a whole load of things, and I want to explore through this talk some of the meanings that we have around anger and the meanings that we create. What is anger for you? Anger is a symptom. Anger is a door into long-term therapy for some clients and shorter-term psychoeducation for others. In anger we can suffer a sense of aloneness, the idea that it's only me that has a problem. In fact, maybe I am the problem. Yet anger is an expression of our humanity, and I believe that not to experience anger is not to be truly alive. So my work is really about developing a different relationship with anger. Not only can it be a light which shines into our shadow and into the darkest crevices of our own psyche, it's an energy that can be harnessed to drive us to great things. Anger that's out of proportion gives us information. It can be a symptom of an existential crisis and acting out of our history in the present. Working with anger can be existential, gestalt, somatic, or whatever label you care to put on it, but it's always a journey. And each of us makes us shape of our anger in our own way, whether it's that, whether it's that. We have a shape which both creates anger and reflects anger, and you might just want to reflect on the shape of anger that you make or that's familiar to you. We make the shape of our anger, and each of us may express anger at the boundary between ourself and the environment. Each of us finds in our anger fear of death, freedom, isolation and meaninglessness. Anger can be expressed by the borderline, the narcissist, the swollen, the collapsed, the dense and the rigid. But what's important is that anger tells me something's wrong, something's going on. An angry child is often a symptom of something going on in the family. The child can be the canary in the domestic coal mine. How many times have I had a parent ring me up and say, I've got an angry child? And I will always say, well, I want to meet the parents first and talk about what's going on in the family, because that child brings you information about the family. How many times do I quietly thank the child for their anger? An anger which has brought the whole family to a place where they can start healing the family system. Then there's anger in couples, and it's often seen in the childhood trauma which is played out in the relationship and in people's attachment issues. Each partner coming up against a different way of being, unable to dock. Through anger we can learn to fill our emotional tank from within, rather than through dependence on the external for the shape of our existence. So anger has many layers. And I hope this works. There we are. Okay. So my work's based on the following simple ideas. First one is that anger is a symptom, and it gives us information. And it's so often the symptom that brings the client to me. And often they're not necessarily ready for the exploration that comes with that. They just want to deal with the symptom, with the behaviour, and sometimes that can get in the way of the actual work itself. My starting point is that what we want to do is change our relationship with anger, not to get rid of it. As I mentioned before, to get rid of our anger, we get rid of our own humanity, and here we are. Anger gives us information about our perception of meaning. When I'm angry, it tells me something about me. It tells me about my history, about who I am, how I'm perceiving the world, and the meanings that I lay onto events in the world. So anger is actually welcome. It's this great source of information for us. This idea of a different therapy for each person is something that's very important, because again, anger brings them, but then the path that we take from there has to be different from each person, and where the anger leads us, we won't know. And again, a lot of people come to me, what they want is an out-of-the-box therapy. They say, right, I want you to solve me, I want to be fixed, just like that. And I say, I don't know how to do that. I know how to explore with you. And finally, the relationship is everything. There are 3 facets to relationship, and I'll talk more about them later. One is the relationship between the client and the therapist, and I'm sure you will understand this anyhow, the idea that everything comes out in that relationship. And when a client's angry with me, I welcome it. We can really explore it in the here and now, in real time. And then the bottom line about relationship, as you already mentioned, the idea that we have an internal relationship with ourselves, and then we play out that internal relationship externally, with the world, with other people. So through changing your relationship with anger, you can slowly start to explore and to reveal who you are and how you are in the world. And I want to explore some basic ideas about anger here, and some basic ideas about working with anger before moving on to some more general ideas about how I work and the context in which anger is explored through relationship. So what is anger? It's the first question I always ask. Turn to the person next to you and just take 2 minutes to discuss what anger is for you. Please. Okay, so bring that to a close when you're ready. I suspect I could have let this one run for a long time and we could have had a very good discussion about it. But I just want to make a few remarks. I wonder what you noticed. I wonder how you even framed the question. What do you know about your own anger? Is it visible? Is it invisible? Did you frame it as a behaviour, as a thought, as a feeling, as things you don't like, as a reaction to others? Did you think about the shape of your anger? How you create it? How you embody your anger? What did you learn about yourself? You know, in anger we tend to miss out on the detail and the complexity of our experience of ourselves. Anger hijacks us. We're reduced to polarity, to black and white. We lose our capacity for empathy. We wish only to survive, hide, hurt, blame, punish, fight, flight, freeze. All familiar stuff. I quite like the metaphor, this little metaphor. You know when they bomb Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and wherever, we have these incredibly sophisticated and complicated aeroplanes, Typhoons, Phantoms, whatever the heck they're called, and they cost about $30 to $50 million each. But the pilots are in absolute fear. And what are they in fear of? They're in fear of a guy standing on a hillock, smoking a cigarette, tending his sheep, with a thing on his shoulder. He just goes, pop! And down they come. Terrifying. And so what they do, and this is a technique they developed in the Second World War, is they drop millions of, or thousands, hundreds of thousands of little silver squares of silver foil before they do their bombing runs. And the effect of that on the direction finding of these missiles, it makes them go and the missiles go all over the place and pop. And you know, when I'm angry, that's what happens to me. And in that noise, it's very hard to access either my humanity, my empathy, and my interest in you. And I'll tend to do things that I really may regret. And so one of the challenges is to get in charge of that experience of hijack. So here's some ideas about what anger is. A symptom. It gives me information. It's a feeling. I think we all know that one. It's a response to an unmet need. It can be a response to a boundary violation. You come into my space, whether I'm in the queue or in the traffic. Oh! Keep out of my space. It can be our own creation through the attribution of meaning. For example, say we're going to meet for a drink and you're 10 minutes late. In the scheme of my life, your lateness is not very important. But if I choose to put a layer of meaning on that, well, you're cheeky, you're disrespectful, you're not really interested in me, you couldn't be bothered, I can create a whole sack full of anger and dump it on you and find a way of punishing you and blaming you for that lateness, and maybe not even bother to ask, oh, I noticed you were late, what's going on? Oh, I missed the bus. End of story. So meaning is very important in this, how through the meaning that we layer onto events, we can actually create our own anger. And that's actually really good news, because once we can get hold of that, we can start to get in charge of this. And actually the bottom line of this work is about getting in charge and regulation of who we are as an organism. Anger is a sign of our history. Each of us has history, each of us has our childhood wounds. And very small events can trigger that history and set off our anger. And I know, at least at this stage of my life, when my history is set off, as it still is, I'm at least able to say, gosh, look, I'm still in my history. How am I going to contain this? So that awareness in itself is a huge step forward. So anger is a sign of so much. It tells us so much. And yet, the popular image of anger is as noise. It's like a volcano. It's the smoke, the fumes, the flames, the rocks coming out of a volcano. But if we take a moment and we actually dive down through that volcano, down into the center of the earth, what we find is information, red-hot information, both in feelings, hurt, shame, fear, powerlessness, and thoughts and ideas and meanings which actually drive and create our anger. How do you know when you're angry? Again, it's a question I very often ask my clients. How do you know when you're angry? 50% have no idea, I just am. The other 50% describe in great detail. I feel it here. I feel it here. I feel it here. How do you know when you're angry? Just take 30 seconds just to ask yourself how you know you're angry. What tells you you're angry? For me, I've got two ways of knowing I'm angry. Solar plexus, it's like someone's tied a knot in it. And it can jump up on me like that for no apparent reason. Wow, I'm really angry, what's going on? Gives me information. And the place I actually create my anger is right here. There's a little muscle here. And I do something there, almost imperceptible. And bang, I'm angry. Quite extraordinary. And I can play with this behaviour right here and grade it and actually start to affect the intensity of my own experience. So we can really start to get into some detail about regulation and management of our own experience of being in the world. This is really good news. This is really, really good news, I think. Here's another way into anger. Again, just take a couple of minutes, close your eyes, and just visualize your anger. What does it look like to you when you close your eyes? Okay, so thank you for that. And again, ask yourself, what did you notice? What did you learn about yourself? What moved from background to foreground in your awareness? Anger can be amorphous. It can sit in our shadow. It can sit in a place where we can't see it. And from that place, it hijacks and controls us. And in the same way as looking at our anger somatically, a visualization of our anger gives us an opportunity in a way of forming relationship with it and actually getting a handle on it and bringing it closer. Anger can be cold or hot. It can be still. It can be pulsating. It can be bright or dark, loud or soft. It can be shaped or shapeless. And each of us has and creates our own unique experience of anger. And by working with anger in this way, we can start to get a handle of it. And it's a way that the client can then also own their own. I can own my own, you can own your experience of how you create and get in contact with anger. And I can't say that strongly enough, because again, the word anger management creates so many images, and they're all wrong. They're all wrong. I go back to this idea of I'm going to come along and learn how to do my anger out of a book. There is no out of a book. It's on you to own it and to work with it, to regulate it. And some people really don't want to get a hold of that. And in a way that's fair enough. And the challenge for me, and I have this very clear way of how I want to do things, is to actually be able to be with someone where they are. So if someone walks in and say, well, this is what I want a program. I say, okay, you can have a program. And I'll give them a program. I know how to do that. And I'll trust that in that program, something will happen. And things will start to emerge. It most certainly happens in my anger management groups, and most certainly people come along and they bring their notebooks and their pencils, they're going to write everything down, and they're going to learn about anger the same way they learn French or Chinese or Spanish or maths. I'm fine with that. And believe me, by session 4 or 5, I imagine most of you know all this and have experienced this. Something just happens. The group gels, people soften, and I just trust that that process will take place in as much as the person is ready for it. In the same way as if I have a plate of food, I'll try things and I'll take as much as I want, and if I don't like it, I'll spit it out. And that's the process, and it's all about process, this work. So, anger's got a bad reputation. I do quite a lot of radio interviews and stuff like that. And invariably I get phoned up when someone like Joey Barton or Hugh Grant or Naomi Campbell has hit her assistant with whatever she hit her assistant with. And they want to talk about this kind of anger, this very visible, aggressive, nasty kind of explosive anger. And I really worry about anger's reputation, and this is why I proselytize so much about it and welcome anger and want to tell people what a good thing it is. It reminds me of many years ago I was invited to be on the Anna Rayburn show. She did a marvellous show on LBC, and she invited me on. We had an hour just talking about anger. It was marvellous to be just sitting there and really letting people know what I thought anger was. The thing is, I came back, and the next morning I was seeing a client, and the client I knew very well. We all form relationships with clients. And this client was always on time and very enthusiastic. And this day, she was about 10-15 minutes late. I thought, this is unusual. And she walked in, but no, she didn't walk in. She came in like this. Literally, she flounced in. She sat herself down. She said, David, I'm really angry with you. Like the clever dick I am. I said, anger's welcome here. And she said, I'm absolutely furious with you. She said, I'm so furious, I nearly didn't come today. In fact, I nearly didn't come back at all. And I said, well, tell me more. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell have I done? I couldn't think. And she said, you betrayed my confidentiality on the radio yesterday. I think, okay. I said, tell me more. She said, and she went, she said, you said this, and this, and they were all about me and my confidentiality, and you've betrayed all your professional principles, and I'm never coming back again. I took a deep breath. I said, you're right. She went, oh. And by the way, I've got a great tip sheet for dealing with angry people. And at the top of it is to acknowledge their anger. And if they're right, to say, you're right. There is more to this, by the way. So I said, you're right. I did say all those things. Yes, they are all about you. And she went up and I said, hold on a minute. I said, but here's the thing. They're also all about me. They're also all about everyone I've ever worked with and all the people I haven't. And that's really important. Because so many of us in our anger isolate ourselves and say to ourselves, well, it's just me. Not only I've got a problem, I am a problem. We go out in the streets, in the buses, in the tubes, at work, at parties, and we think, it's just me. Look, everyone else is fine. And I think everyone knows what fine stands for, so I won't repeat it. Everyone else is fine. It's just me. And that's just not true. If we don't experience anger in some shape or form, we're either dead or we're a robot. And holding the idea that it's just me then adds a cubed sign or a 4 sign or a squared sign, whatever they are, to our experience of anger and our experience of shame. So anger is welcome and immensely valuable. Oh, I've forgotten about that slide. There we are. So the objective of all this is to change our relationship with anger. It's about having a relationship with anger in a different way. And what many of us tend to do in our fear about expressing anger is we tend to use substitutes. How many of these are familiar to you? Blaming, shaming, mocking, demeaning, ignoring, criticizing, minimizing, distancing. These are all substitutes for saying to someone, I'm angry with you. I felt angry when you were late because I thought you weren't taking our meeting seriously. I'd like you to be on time. I felt angry with you when you were late because I thought you weren't taking our meeting seriously. And actually, if I own up about me, I don't always take our meetings seriously. There's the owning up. There's the projection. So there are all sorts of ways of not expressing anger healthily. And one of the challenges is to catch those, to stop, and to say, I'm angry with you. And notice what happens for you when you try and say, I'm angry with you. What roadblocks you may put in the way of making that simple statement. The layers of meaning you may put on that and the fear of how that will be received. Okay. So now this is interesting to me. I really need a long stick to do this, which I haven't got. And the reason that I wanted to show you this... Yeah? Yeah. Oh yes, there we are. Okay, that's good, thank you. And the reason I want to show you this is because it's a sort of cognitive model. But what's interesting to me is how this came up, this model. And it was actually developed through a number of conversations with a client, where we just started talking about, if you like, their internal architecture and how they put themselves together. I just gradually developed this as sort of schematic, if you like, of internal architecture. And I've since used it with many, many people. And each time I show it to someone, they go, oh, how did you know? So I want to just run through this very quickly. So starting at the top, this idea of shame, the idea that we each carry shame, both healthy shame, the shame that comes with being human, and toxic shame. And really what we're talking about here is toxic shame. And from the toxic shame we develop a sense of fear, a fear of being exposed. People are going to find me out. Again, I had one client who was actually very well known, very used to the media and being in public. And yet this person talked to me about how when they went to parties, they would walk into the room and feel like they had a big sign over their head saying, there's something wrong with me. And so they stopped going and they started to hide themselves away and just not socialise at all. And here it is, from the fear of being exposed, the fear of showing yourself, because I'll be rejected, I hide. I say nothing. I don't represent myself. So I reject who I am. I actually do the very thing that I fear will happen. I carry out the hit on myself. Again, I'm going to tell you something, don't tell anybody, this one, is when I was in my teens I used to go to discos, and frequently I'd look across the room and there'd be a girl standing there and I'd think, gosh, she's attractive. But she would never like me. And so I never walked across that floor. I never said, hi, my name's David. I never said, would you like to go for a coffee? Would you like a dance? And so I'd walk out of the disco every Saturday night feeling angry, hurt, shamed and rejected. And who'd created that? Me. Incredible. Scary thinking back on it. So in my self-rejection, I make myself powerless. I shrink internally. I make myself small. My powerlessness, my feeling of low self-esteem drives anger. Then I act my anger out. I can act it out in two ways. I can act it outwards, explosively, or internally I can internalize it. And again, how many of my clients come to me and they say, I shouted at my kids, I slapped my wife, whatever, and now I feel the most terrible shame. There it is. I act out my anger, I punish you, I punish myself, and back to shame. There's the cycle. I call this alternatives worlds, because this side is the alternative, and I don't want to go into this too much now, just for time reasons. But again, this isn't an either or. That's why I've put these arrows here. Because what I know for me is that I pulsate between the two. And sometimes the power of my shame becomes very strong. Other times I move more to this alternative world, the world of self-esteem and feeling good enough. Again, this may be familiar to some of you. It certainly is to me. So, moving rapidly on. Coming back to the idea of what is anger. We talk about anger as one thing. I think it's useful to understand that anger has two layers to it. And I use the terms righteous and regressive anger. Righteous anger. It's proportionate. It's in the here and now. You're late by 10 minutes for my meeting. I'm going on about this meeting. I've really got something attached to this meeting, haven't I? You're late for this meeting and you walk in and I say, oh, I see you're a bit late. I feel a little sad and I was a bit worried you wouldn't turn up. And if you're going to be late, I'd like you to let me know. Finished. Over. Proportionate. Scenario 2. You walk into the meeting and I think, God, you're really cheeky, you know. Who the hell do you think you are? How dare you be late for me? What kind of person? Etc. Yeah. Then I'm in my history. Then I'm in my stuff. I'm in my shame. I'm in my sack of anger. I'm in all my beliefs about myself. That I'm not good enough. That I'm not worthy. I'm in my childhood wounds. Your lateness is the trigger. So what's the hallmark of historic anger? Is that it's out of proportion to the event. And what happens in historic anger is it takes us over. As I mentioned before, it hijacks us. Our old brain, that little bugger of an old brain that we each of us carry, the brain that helped us to survive in the primeval swamp when we were lizards tramping around and we come face to face, and which one of us is going to be dinner? And the anger mechanism kicked in immediately, the survival mechanism. We still have that. And how bizarre that you're a few minutes later late for a meeting and I kick into survival, and which one of us is going to be dinner? And again, very often we can disguise one anger with the other. Oh, you see, I was justified in being angry because they did that, so I killed him. Well, we can have layers. Justified anger, righteous anger, and regressive anger can exist around the same event. I recall a story about a guy who was walking along the high road with his grandma, and someone ran past and bumped the grandma. And you know what's an appropriate response? Oi, you, look what you did, come here, can you just help me get her up? Sort of proportionate. It was an accident. This guy went up to the other guy and laid him out and put him in hospital. 2 layers going on there, righteous and regressive anger. So the power of our history is huge. The imprint on our limbic system, which is where we hold our trauma. Our limbic system doesn't know past, present and future. Everything is in the present. And so in the present, we reenact our history. Anger styles. Have you thought about how you express your anger? The styles of anger. There are many different ways. Let me just see how we're doing for time. Oh, okay. I want to concentrate on one style rather than try and go through everything. At the simplest level, we have imploders and exploders. But what's important is that neither of us is one or the other. We pulsate between them. So I may hold my anger for a long time about something, I turn it inwards, but eventually the pressure gets too much and I explode. And it's very easy to start to categorize ourselves, well, I implode or explode, but we cycle through the anger styles. And again, I've had the experience of people saying, oh, there we are, I'm that. And I say, are you sure? Oh, well, I'm a bit of that, and a bit of that, and a bit of that as well. And this has a lot of crossover with the drama triangle, persecutor, victim, rescue, and how we cycle between different styles of anger, all of them toxic, in order to try and get our needs met. So I just want to talk briefly about the imploding, because I'm on a mission to publicise imploding. Poor me. None of you met my grandmother, but you all know her. She wasn't so badly off, she wasn't so ill till the very end. And she'd sit there at the family table. Poor me. It's toxic in the family system. It's a way of controlling, it's a way of getting power, a way of getting your needs met. And it contaminates the group dynamic. And the poor me, the victim, has a huge amount of power. Think of that phrase, after all I've done for you. Woo! I have to really fight with that one sometimes with the children, you know. After all I've done for you. No! Intent to create shame. Yeah? To get my power back. So essentially all these positions are powerless because I seek to get my power back from you externally rather than finding the shape of self-esteem and power and an organisation of that within myself. The distancers are the scariest. I haven't got a problem. I'm not angry. The distancer always wants people to run after them. The distancers are often the ones who go to suicide, and they often won't come, well, they nearly always won't come to groups unless they've been sent. I've had 1 or 2 distancers, and each time they've left the group because it's just been too scary for them to start to unlock and to reveal what's going on. Their defence is denial. Their heart's not available to them, and they'll often withdraw their love to punish. They don't realise the effect their behaviour has on others, and they will often contaminate the group. Then we've got the winder-upper. And this is someone who can't face confrontation. And the unconscious motive is to get other people to express their unexpressed anger. My intention is to have fun at your expense. But of course the cost to me is that you never know whether I'm serious or when I'm joking. So I lose any possibility of real contact or intimacy. And the John Terry case recently was very interesting, and it boiled down not to what was said, but how John Terry said it. And the 2 possibilities was either that he said it confrontationally, or that he said it sarcastically. And according to the magistrate, the first made him guilty, and the second was actually the basis for his acquittal. This is bizarre. And had I been called as an expert witness, this is what I would have said. Sarcasm is a form of angry behaviour. We use sarcasm when we ourselves are feeling angry, yet we're not willing to express our anger in a healthy way. Thus we use words which are designed to get a reaction, but say them in a way which enables us to appear blameless and to avoid responsibility for our behaviour. The purpose of sarcasm is to create anger in the other person covertly, to get them to express the anger that the sarcastic person is feeling, but not expressing openly. Sarcasm is what we refer to as anger through the back door. How am I doing? I'm running out of time. I better get on with this. What makes me angry? I'll just do this one very quickly. Think for a moment about all the things that make you angry. All the external things. You make me angry. You make me angry. White vans make me angry. Traffic jams make me angry. Lateness makes me angry. My son's room being untidy makes me angry. Being misunderstood by you makes me angry. The idea that anyone else but me makes me angry. But actually, in the end, the only way you can make me angry in the purest sense is by coming up to me and giving me a whack. Then the old brain really kicks in a useful way, because I want to get out and be safe. Otherwise, the meaning that I put on events makes me angry. And that's volitional. So I have choices. And when I really start to grip with how I project meaning onto the world, I can really start to get a grip with how I create my own anger. Each of us has a sack of anger. I can say that with confidence, which we carry around with us. A sack of shame, a sack of hurt, a sack of history, a sack of meanings. And that can be triggered so easily by hundreds of external factors. And our challenge is just to own that sack of anger that we carry. Expectations are a booger. They really are. This is a quote from a great man who's been my teacher for many years. And he says it in his Yorkshire brogue. Expectations are a booger. They really are. Expectations keep us apart from ourselves and apart from others. Our expectations are often unstated and based on our attachment needs. In couples, these are almost certain not to be met. And then we play out our anger, focused on the terrible other, who cannot, will not, and is probably not even aware of our unmet childhood needs and trauma. And when we have unrealistic expectations of others, we don't see the person. We put a roadblock in the way, and those expectations are a roadblock. How can I see you when all I see is my own unmet needs? For those of you who work with couples, you'll know that. Anyhow. And that plays out all the time. So unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others get in the way of relationship. And whatever the symptom, I believe all clients come to me because they're dissatisfied with their way of being in the world, as reflected in their internal and external relationships. We're plagued by expectations about our partners, our friends, ourselves, and life in general. All the shoulds. There's a familiar one. Anyone not got shoulds? I thought not. You should have shoulds. So, we often want the world to give us things that we're not willing to give ourselves. I'll just do this one very quickly. What do you see? This is a replacement for the one with the old man with a woman on his head. Yeah, this is one I knocked up because I got bored with that one. Yeah? So, I'm going to just raise some questions around this. How do we deal with difference? How do I deal with difference? How do I bring myself to relationship when I'm different to you in my meanings, in my needs, in my perceptions? How are we going to dock if we are different? If I stop expecting you to be like me? Can we agree to disagree? Can we accommodate? If we're going to go out for dinner, I want red dinner and you want yellow dinner? Do we go for blue dinner, in which case no one's happy? Or do we say we'll have red dinner tonight and yellow dinner next week? How can I accommodate to you? I don't like the word compromise. Compromise is a giving up of myself. Can I be curious about you rather than defensive? And what can I learn from you, from your way of seeing things? I think curiosity in relationship is a real tool, a real value, but it's also very hard to access. So, relationship, that old one, eh? Relationship. We've started to talk about meaning, and through the meanings we put on events, we create our own experience. We generate and we recreate our anger and our shame. We use meaning to create our sense of self and the context in which we exist. How do you bring yourself to relationship? With yourself, with others, the world, and a certain knowledge of death. I believe that underlying all anxiety and anger are the givens, as I said before, of death, freedom, isolation and meaningless. And this is meaninglessness. And this is borne out again and again in my work. We start with anger, and we end up with death. Incredible. Person comes, I want to be cured of anger. I'm talking about dying. Amazing. It's such a privilege to do this work, to go on these journeys. So all paths lead to death. Yet death is itself an affirmation of life and gives it value. It's the ultimate boundary without which our lives would actually have no meaning. So there's the paradox. In fear of death, it's hard to give my life meaning. When I embrace it, my life has a shape and I can make sense of it and it has a value. If I were to live forever, my life would have no value. There's that damn boundary. I better make the most of it. The child in there crying in the crib, the fear of abandonment, the Freudian fantasy bond, the cries of anger and fear, the desperation for protection by the parents. So, back to how we create meaning through relationship, through making relationships, internal and external. The ultimate purpose of therapy, as you mentioned. In any relationship, you're the most important person. You're foremost in your relationship with yourself, and you take that to your relationship with others. When we take our eye off our own ball, we lose something. Contact, appreciation, affiliation. Only we can be responsible for ourselves. Can anyone recognize him? I'm not going to say much about him, but this Yerkes-Dodson curve is a very interesting curve. What it posits is the idea that there's a place of maximum efficiency and maximum arousal. In other words, when we're sort of 2/3 aroused, we will perform at our best. And when we become over-aroused, it's like driving a car at 130 miles an hour in third gear. We don't perform at our best. And this is again about regulation, and I think I had a whole thing to say about Andy Murray, which I can share with you afterwards if you like, but I think this is what he managed to get a handle on, is regulation. Instead of throwing away all his energy into outbursts of anger, uncontained anger, he was able to regulate and focus and manage himself at about 80%, where he was the most efficient. Finally, anger is universal. Without anger, we're not alive. It's a powerful river running through all our lives. It can be a force for good and achievement while also driving terrible deeds and behaviours. In August, and still going on now, both types of anger were played out at the Olympics and in Aleppo, the Syrian city. Before the athlete comes the person. Before you're a soldier, you're a person. You play out your anger in your sporting career. You play out your anger in the fight against oppression or the slaughter of the innocents. You play out your anger in the vindication of love for your parents and in the expression of your childhood wounds in the present. So anger can support us or it can undermine us. It's a nuclear fuel that can power us to great things or it can cause disaster. Tragically, while one group of young people had the opportunity to channel and play out their anger, their life energy in entertaining and affirming in the Olympics this summer, another group made the front pages another way in the conflict in Syria, the most violent stage of the Arab Spring so far, and as we know, over 30,000 people have died. The alleged massacres by both sides, a sign of nuclear anger that's gone into meltdown. So anger out of control gets in the way. It gets in the way of relationship, of diplomacy and humanity. Kofi Annan even resigned. He called it a mission impossible. This is the anger with a bad name and a bad reputation. But let's not judge anger itself by the terrible behaviours which are driven by it. Let's understand it as a sign of who we are, a symptom of something that we may think is wrong, something that we need to pay attention to. Anger, which is regulated, contained and expressed in healthy ways, can drive us to great things. It's driving me in this talk. By changing our relationship with anger, by accepting the part of ourselves that is angry, we can change our relationship with ourselves. Nelson Mandela, more than anyone else in modern life, for me embodies the focus of anger on justice, freedom and forgiveness. He famously said, "There's no passion to be found in settling for a life that is less than the one you're capable of living." To live our life to the full, we must embrace the force and vitality of anger. Our opportunity is to accept, to engage, to regulate. And in this way we can start to really get in charge of ourselves. Anger shines the light on our innermost selves, and if we allow it, gives us guidance as to our internal architecture, as to who we are, and as how we want to be in the world. Thank you.